When Karen banned my nephew from using the neighborhood pool, I didn't even know who she was. 6 months later, I knew her name, her bank account numbers, and every skeleton buried in her closet. That transformation, from quietly grieving neighbor to relentless investigator, happened because Karen Mitchell made one serious miscalculation. She decided to pick a fight with a retired construction lawyer, one who had spent 2 decades unraveling fraud and contract abuse, and who, after losing his wife, had nothing left to lose. It was 6 on a Tuesday when I opened my front door, still in my bathrobe, a hot mug of coffee in hand, only to find 2 confused police officers on my porch, flanked by one very self-satisfied woman in a pristine tennis outfit. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Some truths deserve to be heard. The morning air carried a strange blend of steam from my cup and her overpowering vanilla perfume, and in that moment, I should have realized this wasn't about pool rules anymore. So let me ask you, what would you do if your HOA's self-appointed queen tried to weaponize the police against you? Leave your worst HOA horror story in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from. I've got a feeling I'm not the only one living next to a power-hungry neighbor. I'm Dave Martinez, and 8 months ago, I really believed I was moving to paradise, Willowbrook Estates. 127 picture-perfect homes, all built in the last few years, centered around a $400,000 community pool that looked like something out of a luxury resort brochure. I paid extra for the corner lot with a perfect view of that pool, $750,000, when most homes here were going for $650,000. But I didn't mind. After watching my wife, Sarah, fight cancer for 3 years, I needed a fresh start. She passed last October. The house we'd shared for over 2 decades had become a shrine of memories I couldn't breathe in anymore. So I packed my things, retired from my career in construction law, and moved to Willowbrook to start a new chapter. My mornings became quiet rituals: coffee, sunrise, the gentle rhythm of lapped swimmers cutting across the pool. It was peaceful, exactly what my grief counselor had told me to seek. And then I met her, Karen Mitchell, mid-40s, real estate agent, HOA vice president, lived in the model home right at the front of the development, always dressed in designer workout gear, hair done, clipboard in hand, like she was managing a billion-dollar portfolio instead of a few rows of suburban lawns. Married to city councilman Brad Mitchell, which she made sure everyone knew within 5 minutes of meeting her. For a while, we had no issues. I followed the rules, kept my lawn neat, kept to myself. I was starting to feel human again. Then summer came. So did my nephew, Miguel. He's 16, my brother's kid from Phoenix. Smart, respectful, heading to engineering school next year. The kind of kid who still calls me Mr. Martinez, even though I keep telling him not to. Sarah and I never had children. First careers, then chemo, so Miguel's the closest I've ever had to a son. That summer, he stayed with me, working at the local hardware store and keeping his old uncle company. One sunny Tuesday, he invited 2 friends from work over to enjoy the pool. Good kids, polite. They brought snacks, said please and thank you. They were in the water for maybe an hour and a half, laughing, tossing a ball around. Normal summer stuff. Then, like clockwork, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. She marched over through the thick scent of chlorine and that cloying vanilla perfume and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, I need to see guest passes for these young men. I blinked. Guest passes? I'd lived here nearly a year and had never even heard of such a thing. They're family, I told her calmly. This is Miguel, my nephew, and his friends from work. Her smile could have cut glass. Rules are rules, Mr. Martinez. Our bylaws clearly state that no more than 2 guests per household per week without prior registration. I offered to register them on the spot, but she cut me off. No exceptions. Then, consulting her clipboard like it was scripture, she said, pool privileges are suspended for Lot 47 pending compliance review. You could hear the creak of pool chairs as everyone around us suddenly became fascinated with their phones. Nobody wanted to be the next person on her radar. Miguel and his friends quietly gathered their towels, heads down, embarrassed. That night, Karen made it official. posting a suspension notice on the community board and announcing it again at the weekly HOA meeting with the theatrical flair of someone announcing a public shaming. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about rules. This was about dominance, control, and making an example out of the new guy. But what Karen didn't know was that the new guy used to make a living dismantling people like her. 3 days later, I received a certified letter. Karen had scheduled a compliance hearing, giving me just 48 hours notice. The hearing? Thursday night. Sarah's birthday. I'd planned to visit her grave, bring sunflowers, talk to her like I still do sometimes. Instead, I was told to defend myself against an HOA tribunal in what sounded like a scene from a bad TV drama. The letter listed several violations. Trash cans visible from the street. They weren't. Lawn height exceeding 5 inches. It measured 3.2. And my personal favorite, failure to maintain community harmony through guest management. That night, I did what I do best. I read every single line of the HOA bylaws, the charter, the closing documents, everything. 20 years in construction law teaches you this. If someone is using the rules as a weapon, there's always a loophole hiding somewhere. And I found it. Page 47 of the community charter. Reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. Her guest policy? In direct violation. Even better, her certified letter broke 3 procedural rules. Too little notice, no reference to specific bylaw numbers, and worst of all, scheduling during a family hardship. Thursday night, I walked into her home. Yes, she hosted the hearing in her own dining room, carrying a manila folder packed with documents, each page highlighted, color-coded, and tabbed. The smell of lavender air freshener was suffocating. I half wondered if she was trying to cover up something rotten underneath. Maybe corruption really does have a scent. As I sat down and looked around at the uncomfortable faces on the board, I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my nephew. I was holding a mirror up to the petty tyranny that people like Karen wrap in rules and clipboards. And I was just getting started. Walsh, our HOA president and a recently retired high school teacher, kept shifting uncomfortably in his seat, while Maria Santos, the treasurer and a sharp, no-nonsense accountant, took notes with the precision of someone logging courtroom evidence. Karen's husband, Brad, was notably absent, likely wise enough to stay out of the line of fire and preserve some plausible deniability. Karen began the meeting with a full-blown PowerPoint presentation. Yes, really, featuring slides on community standards and property values, with every third slide clearly aimed at certain unnamed residents who, according to her, didn't quite belong. The sharp tapping of her manicured nails against the mahogany table matched her smug tone, and when she finally wrapped up her self-important monologue, I stood, calm and prepared, and laid out my documents. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to address several procedural violations regarding tonight's hearing. First, I pointed out that HOA business legally can't be held inside a board member's private home without prior community notice. Second, the 48-hour notice I received violates our own bylaws, which require a minimum of 7 days' notice for any compliance hearing. Third, the violations mentioned in her letter didn't even match any specific bylaw language. That's when Walsh perked up and asked, Dave, are you saying this hearing isn't valid? I looked him in the eye and replied, if we're going to enforce rules, we ought to follow them too. I opened my folder and handed over highlighted pages from the community charter, quoting directly, reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. I explained that Miguel's pool day, with 2 friends, fell clearly within that protection. Karen's face flushed, and she snapped, that language is outdated. I replied, with respect, Karen, that charter can only be changed by a full community vote. Has that vote occurred? The silence that followed was loud. Maria Santos looked up from her notes and gave a subtle shake of her head. Then Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of acknowledging the flaws in the hearing or offering to reschedule, she made it personal. Maybe Mr. Martinez is having trouble adjusting to community life after his recent loss, she said, her tone dripping with fake concern. Perhaps the stress of new rules is overwhelming. The room fell dead silent. Even her loyalists looked uncomfortable. You could hear the distant hum of the AIC as I gathered my documents slowly and deliberately. "Thank you all for your time," I said. "I'll be reviewing the charter further, and we'll be in touch." The vote passed 4-2 to uphold the pool ban, with both Walsh and Maria dissenting. But something in the room had changed. Karen had exposed her true self, and the board had finally seen a glimpse of what I was up against. That night, I opened my laptop and began the kind of research I hadn't done since my last major construction fraud case, digging into HOA formation records, municipal filings, and Karen's real estate history. Everything was public record if you knew where to look. By 2 a.m., I'd already found the first thread. Karen Mitchell Realty had been the exclusive sales agent during Willowbrook's construction phase, an arrangement that typically comes with lucrative incentives. I intended to find out exactly what those were. But Karen didn't waste time striking back. Within a week, she launched something she called the Neighborhood Watch Patrol. 3 clipboard-carrying residents with cameras who suddenly began flagging every tiny rule violation in the community. People were getting cited for things nobody had enforced in years. Basketball hoops visible through garage windows, more than 2 garden gnomes, Christmas lights in July. But I was her favorite target. Drive-bys became daily. Photos taken from every angle, warning slips left under visitors' windshield wipers. Miguel joked she was stalking us, but I saw the worry creeping into his eyes. No teenager should feel guilty just for hanging out with his uncle. Worse, fear was spreading through the community. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Some newer residents backed Karen's crusade for standards, while longtime homeowners whispered their frustrations in hushed voices at the grocery store. One morning, after a quiet walk, Maria Santos approached me. She's petite, but tough, the kind of accountant who can smell a discrepancy a mile away. "Dave," she said quietly, glancing around like we were conspiring, "we need to talk. Something's not right with the HOA's finances." While Karen played mall cop, I did what I do best, follow the money. I installed discreet legal security cameras and began tracking her patrol schedule. Every drive-by, every photo, every intimidation, time-stamped and documented. Here's a tip. Most folks don't know HOA boards are legally required to issue written warnings before imposing penalties. Karen's sudden pool ban and verbal harassment? Completely illegal under state law. One lesson: document everything, because HOA board members could be held personally liable for procedural abuse. Quietly, I also reached out to Walsh and Santos. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. Jim told me about families who'd quietly left Willowbrook just to escape her, and Maria, still gathering proof, hinted at deeper financial misconduct. Then came the Friday that changed everything. Miguel and his friends had waited until official family hours to use the pool, followed every rule, and were swimming quietly when Karen appeared, flanked by her new patrol squad. "Exit the pool immediately," she barked. Lot 47 remained suspended. The boys left without complaint. Miguel had warned them not to argue, but Karen wasn't done. She followed them straight to my house, her posse behind her, voices raised, arms flailing. By the time they reached my driveway, half the neighborhood was peering out their windows. "This is about more than pool rules," she declared. "This is about people who fit our values, and people who don't." That's when my legal instincts kicked in. I pulled out my phone and calmly began recording. "Karen," I said, "can you point to the bylaw that justifies continued suspension of pool access for residents in good standing?" She didn't answer, she ranted. But now she was doing it on video. As she spewed rhetoric about who belonged and who didn't, 3 neighbors stepped outside. Mrs. Chun from across the street looked disgusted. The Johnsons, a young black couple who'd moved in last spring, exchanged a quiet, knowing glance. Karen, oblivious, continued, "Maybe this isn't the right community for you if you can't control your guests." That night, I sent the video to the entire HOA board along with a formal complaint for harassment, misconduct, and targeted discrimination. The email I sent was calm, detailed, and backed with timestamps and witness accounts. It outlined, professionally but firmly, the pattern of discriminatory enforcement Karen had carried out. The board called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday. Karen's defense was exactly what I expected. She claimed she was protecting the community from outside influences and property value threats. When it came time to vote on formally censuring her, it ended in a 3-3 tie. Karen abstained, of course, so no action was taken. But something important had shifted. After the meeting, Maria Santos quietly handed me a manila envelope and whispered, "Look at the construction contracts versus the actual amenity costs. Then tell me what you think." That night, I spread those documents across my dining room table and felt that familiar tingle, the unmistakable feeling that something was off, and I was about to unravel it. The numbers told a story Karen had clearly hoped no one would ever read. Her next move was all-out war. She filed a formal complaint with city code enforcement, accusing me of unpermitted modifications and running a business out of my home. Completely false allegations. The complaint was filed on a Monday. The inspection? Scheduled for Friday. That Friday was Miguel's graduation party, a small family celebration I'd been planning for weeks, with about 20 relatives coming in from across Texas to celebrate Miguel heading off to engineering school. Sarah would have loved seeing everyone together, smiling, proud of Miguel as he cut into his graduation cake. Karen knew about the party, everyone in the neighborhood did, and that's why she scheduled the inspection for the exact same time. At 2 p.m., just as Miguel was cutting his cake, a city code enforcement truck pulled in my driveway, followed by Karen's car. She had come to watch, expecting a public spectacle. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Bob, stepped out with a clipboard and said, "Sorry to interrupt, sir. Got a complaint about unpermitted modifications and overcrowding." I just nodded, walked into the house, and came back with a banker's box. Inside, architectural plans, inspection reports, signed permits, final occupancy approval. Every piece of paper proving I had built this home by the book. I told Bob, "Feel free to compare anything on-site to the approved plans." Meanwhile, Miguel had the presence of mind to live stream the entire inspection on Instagram. "You guys aren't going to believe this," he said to the camera. "Some lady just called code enforcement on my uncle's graduation party." The inspection lasted 2 hours. Bob checked every electrical outlet, measured room dimensions, verified plumbing fixtures, even climbed into the attic to confirm the HVAC. The whole time, Karen stood nearby, suggesting where Bob should look harder, clearly hoping something, anything, would get me cited. Here's a legal tip. When someone files a false code complaint, they could be held financially responsible for the cost of the unnecessary inspection. And sure enough, Bob found nothing, 0 violations. "Actually," he said, "this is one of the better constructed homes I've inspected all year." But Karen didn't take the loss gracefully. She argued with Bob, right there in front of everyone, demanding he recheck the garage, the pool equipment, insisting there had to be a violation. Her voice rising, her composure unraveling, and all of it caught on Miguel's live stream. The comments exploded. "This lady's nuts. Sue her." But here's what Karen didn't realize. While she tried to humiliate me, she exposed herself. During the inspection, my construction trained, I had picked up something far more serious. The architectural plans for my house matched perfectly, but the plans for our community amenities didn't. The specs for the pool didn't match the actual build. The community center dimensions were wrong. The landscaping budget didn't reflect what had actually been installed. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, as the party carried on and the family gathered around the grill, Maria approached me. "Dave," she said, "after watching this circus, I think it's time you see the rest of the financials. There's a smoking gun in those contracts." After everyone left and Miguel finally crashed, exhausted and happy, I sat down at my kitchen table with the new documents. What I saw made my heart pound. The HOA had been billed $2.1 million for amenities that had only cost $1.4 million to build. That meant $700,000 was missing. Karen Mitchell Realty had been involved in every transaction. This wasn't mismanagement. This was embezzlement. It was time to stop playing defense. The smoking gun had been hiding in plain sight, buried in an email thread Maria had quietly saved for 3 years. "I didn't know what I was looking at until you mentioned the discrepancies," she told me, handing over a printed exchange between Karen and the original developer, Sunset Construction. The subject line? Revised community amenity pricing, confidential. My lawyer's instincts kicked in full force. The HOA budget had allocated $2.1 million for the pool, landscaping, clubhouse, and playground. But the actual invoices showed only $1.4 million spent. That missing $700,000 wasn't just a rounding error. Maria flipped to a page of bank statements. Look, she said, pointing Karen's personal account. See these deposits? Large amounts, all during the construction period. And look at the dates. They line up with when the HOA made payments to the developer. Karen Mitchell Realty had received bonuses and commissions nearly 4 times higher than industry norms. But the real smoking gun was yet to come. Among the many files Maria had quietly preserved was one email Karen thought she had deleted. An email that clearly outlined a profit-sharing arrangement with Sunset Construction, where inflated amenity budgets would be buried inside HOA dues and quietly absorbed by the community over time. That single message shattered any remaining doubt. Here's a financial truth that makes your blood boil. It's a common scheme. Developers overinflate amenity costs and then split the profits with insiders who control the approval process. One clear takeaway: never accept HOA special assessments or budget increases without demanding actual invoices, not just projections. This was no longer just about pool access or parking violations. This was about calculated, long-term financial fraud that had drained our community for 3 straight years. Every resident, including families barely making ends meet, had overpaid for cheap, substandard amenities, and they were still being fleeced monthly through inflated dues meant to cover the missing funds. There's more, Maria said grimly. The landscaping, pool cleaning, even snow removal. They're all overpriced by 30 to 40%. Karen gets a cut from every vendor contract. It became undeniably clear. Karen's obsessive enforcement of rules wasn't about protecting property values. It was about suppressing questions. Her harassment campaign against me hadn't escalated because I broke a rule. It escalated because I was the one person with the background to expose the fraud. When I asked Maria why she hadn't brought this to the board sooner, she looked weary. Because Karen runs the board. Jim Walsh is honest but outnumbered. The others are either scared or on her payroll. I needed someone who could understand this mess legally. The irony hit hard. Karen had tried so hard to silence me, but she had accidentally ignited the exact investigation she feared. Her relentless targeting of me wasn't just harassment, it was obstruction. And as someone who'd spent 20 years exposing contractor fraud, I recognized the pattern instantly. Inflate construction costs, skim the profits, and use fear to shut down any accountability. Only this time, I wasn't being paid to investigate. This time, it was personal. What's our next move? Maria asked. I looked at the table covered in evidence. Emails admitting profit sharing, bank statements showing suspicious deposits, contractor invoices that clearly didn't match what had actually been built, and a 3-year pattern of inflated charges that totaled over $700,000. Simple, I said. We give the community the one thing Karen never wanted, the truth. Complete financial transparency. Every single resident deserves to know where their money went and who profited. I felt something inside me awaken, the focused fire I hadn't felt since Sarah passed. And if she tries to stop us, I added, she won't just be facing fraud charges, she'll be adding obstruction of justice to the list. Karen had picked the wrong retired construction attorney to go to war with. It was time to build a case that could hold up in criminal court. Step 1, build a team. Maria brought the insider financial access and years of quietly gathered documents. Jim Walsh offered board legitimacy and moral weight. I contributed legal strategy and 2 decades of deep knowledge on how fraud schemes are structured. Our first strategy meeting was at my place, papers spread across my coffee table like blueprints for a legal battle. Security cameras ensured privacy, and Maria's homemade tamales helped take the edge off the tension. This isn't random theft, I explained. This is a sophisticated, multi-layered embezzlement scheme with 3 clear revenue streams. Inflated construction, overpriced maintenance, and developer kickbacks masked as commissions. Jim's jaw clenched. $700,000? That's almost $6,000 per household. Worse, Maria said, that's just the static theft. We're still getting drained every month by ongoing overcharges. Legal nugget worth knowing. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to protect the community's financial interests, and every resident has the right to demand transparent financial records and independent audits. One key rule: if an HOA refuses to show the books, it's because the books are hiding something. Our battle plan had 4 parts: a criminal referral to the DA for fraud and embezzlement, a civil lawsuit to recover stolen funds, a reform campaign to fix governance, and, most crucially, educating the community so no one could be manipulated again. The key, I told them, is building an airtight case before Karen realizes what we're doing. We had to document everything, preserve every scrap of evidence, and brace for her retaliation. Step 2 was evidence preservation. I showed Maria how to use professional-grade case management software to organize financial documents. Every questionable payment, every contract, every suspicious deposit, fully cross-referenced, time-stamped, and backed by legal-grade documentation. Meanwhile, Miguel had taken on a critical role, our digital reconnaissance lead. At 16, his natural tech savvy was invaluable. He tracked Karen's social media posts, community message board activity, and public perception. Turns out, Karen had been documenting her own downfall. Her posts, full of passive-aggressive threats about certain residents, created a perfect harassment timeline that aligned with every financial irregularity we'd uncovered. Uncle Dave, Miguel said one evening, scrolling through her Facebook feed, she's been posting about you daily, like she's making the prosecution's job easy. Step 3 was legal prep. I brought in Sarah Chun, a sharp criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. Not to defend us, but to help us think like a prosecutor and prepare evidence in a format that DAs could act on. After reviewing our documentation, Sarah leaned back and said, "This isn't just HOA fraud. This is federal-level conspiracy to defraud with email evidence, financial theft, and targeted retaliation against whistleblowers. You've got a criminal case here." The trap we set was clean and simple. We filed official public records requests for all HOA financial documents. Completely legal, well within our rights. Karen would either comply, giving us the missing evidence, or refuse, which would only add obstruction charges to her list of problems. Step 4. Prepare the community. Jim used his role as president to schedule a board meeting about financial transparency and resident concerns. Innocent on the surface, but we knew the real goal: to finally drag this into the light. I spent late nights preparing easy-to-understand presentations with charts and timelines, side-by-side comparisons of what residents paid versus what they received, and clear explanations of their legal rights. We're not trying to overwhelm people with jargon, I explained. We're showing them the truth in a way they can see and feel that they've been robbed. Maria meticulously assembled the financial trail. Every kickback disguised as a service, every inflated charge hidden behind a vague line item, every sketchy payment cross-verified against Karen's deposits. Together, we weren't just building a case, we were building the moment that would change everything. Texas law provides strong protections for HOA residents against financial abuse, though many homeowners are unaware of their rights. To empower our neighbors, I had prepared ready-to-use letter templates to request financial transparency, outlined their legal right to independent audits, and clearly explained what remedies exist for victims of fraud. What made our strategy so effective was its legality. We were acting entirely within our rights as residents. Karen could threaten or retaliate, but she would now be doing so against a community demanding fair oversight, not just one lone voice. By the time we were ready to go public, we had evidence fit for a federal prosecutor's dream and enough grassroots support to make sure Karen couldn't silence us with fear. The real question wasn't whether we could prove wrongdoing. It was how much prison time Karen might face for orchestrating it. Her panic showed the moment our public records requests landed on her desk. Within 48 hours, She called an emergency board meeting to propose new disruptive resident penalties, clearly aimed at me. Her accusations were bold in their dishonesty, painting me as a grieving, unstable widower abusing my legal background to intimidate innocent volunteers and undermine community harmony. She even implied my mourning for Sarah had turned me bitter and paranoid. The smear campaign spread like wildfire. Fake Facebook posts alleged I planned to sue individual residents, while quiet rumors painted me as emotionally unstable and dangerous. Karen's masterstroke, though, came in the form of dog whistle language, vague references to protecting our way of life and residents who fit community values. She was too smart to make overtly discriminatory statements, but her message was clear to anyone paying attention. Fortunately, my years as a construction attorney taught me a critical lesson. When bullies can't silence you, they escalate, and in that escalation, they make mistakes. So instead of responding to her attacks, I kept documenting them, methodically collecting evidence. When Karen's emergency meeting began, the room was packed. Neighbors buzzed with anticipation. The air was heavy with stress, coffee, and curiosity. Karen unveiled her formal proposal. Harsh fines up to $1,000 for disruptive behavior, defined vaguely as anything that undermines volunteer authority or community peace. When she finished, I stood with my folder. Calmly, I outlined how her penalties violated due process protections in the Texas Property Code, how her emergency meeting violated the HOA's own bylaw requiring 7 days' notice for major changes, and how her language was so vague it could be used to silence anyone who dared raise legitimate questions. I also presented documented evidence of her 3-year pattern of harassment, time-stamped photographs, intimidation of visitors, false code complaints, demonstrating that this proposal wasn't about policy, but about silencing dissent. Jim Walsh and Maria Santos supported my statement, and their courage signaled to others that Karen's stranglehold was slipping. Even her usual allies looked increasingly uncomfortable, especially as I reminded them that the meeting was being recorded. Then Karen cracked. Under pressure, her temper flared. "This is exactly what I mean," she shouted. "Mr. Martinez is using legal tricks to bully the board and disrupt our community with his grief and paranoia." I'll let the camera keep rolling. She was doing my job for me. After her proposals were voted down, 5-2, Karen followed me to the parking lot and, with faux concern, tried to cut a deal. "Look, Dave," she said sweetly, "maybe we can work this out. The HOA budget has some flexibility. Maybe we cover your pool costs, a little landscaping help, if you drop the complaints." What she didn't know was my phone was still recording. "That's generous, Karen," I replied, "but financial transparency helps everyone, not just me." Her smile vanished. "Back off," she hissed, "or you'll regret it. My husband has friends in city government. This community knows how to deal with troublemakers." That, too, was caught on tape. The next morning, Karen filed a police report accusing me of threatening her, timed perfectly for maximum drama, just as neighbors were sipping their morning coffee and the patrol car lights lit up my street. But she'd just crossed a legal line I'd been waiting for. She'd officially weaponized law enforcement with a knowingly false accusation, and I had audio proof. I met the officers calmly and said, "You're here about a report from Karen Mitchell? Before anything else, please listen to this recording." The officers' faces shifted from curiosity to alarm as they listened. Few things upset police more than being used in personal vendettas. Later, Officer Rodriguez told her, "Ma'am, filing false reports is a criminal offense. We suggest you stop unless you have real evidence." But Karen wasn't stopping. She was unraveling. With her credibility collapsing and the investigation closing in, she entered full meltdown mode. She filed a formal complaint with the city attorney's office, claiming I was threatening community safety and intimidating board members with legal tactics. She tried to freeze HOA accounts, falsely citing legal threats. When that failed, she pushed for emergency no-confidence votes against Jim Walsh and Maria Santos, hoping to replace them before investigators arrived. Her aim was clear: install loyalists, bury the documents, and kill the truth. The neighborhood began to fracture. Newer residents, many of whom feared legal battles and wanted peace, fell for Karen's narrative. But longtime homeowners, those she'd bullied, fined, and shamed, stood by our call for transparency. Most people weren't even taking sides anymore. They were just exhausted and praying it would end. That's when everything changed. Our story caught the attention of local media. Channel 8 News came calling, and suddenly, our fight for truth wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It was front-page news. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Some truths deserve to be heard. Miguel's viral livestream turned our quiet neighborhood dispute into a symbol of broader abuse in HOA governance, catching the attention of investigative journalists focused on unchecked authority in suburban communities. As Karen scrambled for damage control interviews, I was assembling a comprehensive criminal complaint for the district attorney's office, shaped by 2 decades of experience in construction law and an understanding of how prosecutors build airtight cases. Our evidence was detailed and clear: financial timelines, documented fraud, recorded admissions, and a consistent pattern of obstruction. Within 48 hours, the DA's white-collar crime unit assigned Detective Sarah Chun to the case, and subpoenas were issued for all HOA financial records, developer contracts, and Karen's personal banking history spanning 5 years. "This is substantial," Chun told me after reviewing the evidence. "Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, obstruction. We may be looking at federal charges." For the first time, Karen's misdeeds carried consequences beyond neighborhood squabbles. Her real estate license came under review, her husband's city council seat attracted negative media attention, and her illegal earnings were at risk of being frozen. But when people like Karen feel the walls closing in, they don't go quietly. Suddenly, my pool equipment failed, resulting in $3,000 in damages. My security cameras were tampered with, though not before recording mysterious late-night visitors. A rock shattered my home office window, supposedly launched by a baseball from a field 200 yards away. The harassment expanded to attacks on my professional life. Coordinated phone calls to my old firm alleging I was mentally unstable, anonymous complaints to the state bar accusing me of abusing my law license to threaten residents. Karen's final maneuver was to push for an emergency vote to dissolve the HOA board and replace it with a management company, conveniently one tied to her business associates. But this time, she'd underestimated the scale of what was coming. We had security footage of a sabotage, phone records linking harassment to her circle, and, perhaps most damning, Detective Chen uncovered even more kickbacks embedded in maintenance contracts for landscaping, pool care, and snow removal. Meanwhile, our community education effort was working. 47 residents signed a petition demanding financial transparency, and regional media picked up our story as an example of how HOAs could be corrupted from within. Property law blogs cited our fight as a model for grassroots reform. Miguel's documentation of Karen's conduct didn't just resonate locally. It inspired others across the country to speak up. Her behavior had become a public record, impossible to erase, haunting her reputation with searchable evidence of harassment, fraud, and abuse. As the investigation widened, mail fraud charges came into play, and with the law requiring a full community meeting when an HOA is under criminal scrutiny, Saturday was set for what would become our final reckoning. The meeting was moved to Willowbrook Elementary's gymnasium because our small community center couldn't hold the crowd. 89 of our 127 households showed up, alongside local media, Sarah Chun, Karen's criminal defense attorney, and enough live streams to crash the school Wi-Fi. The air was thick with tension, disinfectant, and sweat. Karen, seated with her lawyer, looked like she had aged years. Maria, Jim, and I sat opposite her, boxes of evidence by our side like legal artillery. Karen's opening was textbook damage control, soft-spoken, carefully rehearsed statements about being a dedicated volunteer unfairly targeted by an unstable widower exploiting his legal training. "This witch hunt," she warned, "is draining our resources and tearing our community apart." She positioned herself as the victim of a man with a grudge, an attack on personality, not accountability. But 20 years of courtroom work had taught me one thing: facts beat spin every time. I connected my laptop to the projector. Before we talk about personalities, I began, let's look at the numbers. Slide 1 showed the original HOA construction budget, $2.1 million. Slide 2, actual construction costs, $1.4 million. A $700,000 discrepancy. That's nearly $6,000 per household for amenities we never received. Gasps echoed across the gym. Numbers don't lie. Next came the ongoing overcharges. Pool maintenance 40% above market rate. Landscaping costs triple the average. And snow removal contracts for a Texas community that sees snow maybe once a decade. We've overpaid $200,000 over 3 years for substandard services, I said. Then came the smoking gun. A projected email on a giant screen, reading, revised community amenity pricing, confidential, with explicit details of profit-sharing arrangements between Karen and the developers. The room went silent. These were Karen's own words, not speculation. This isn't a personality conflict, I said. This is documented financial fraud. Karen finally snapped. Against her attorney's urgent signals to stop, she jumped to her feet. Those emails are out of context, she shouted. I negotiated the best deals I could. If Dave Martinez weren't so obsessed with me because I enforced pool rules against his nephew, none of this would have happened. The crowd stirred in disbelief. In her emotional outburst, Karen not only confirmed financial misconduct, she admitted to targeting my nephew, something that carried the stain of bias and retaliatory intent. And in that moment, any remaining illusion of her moral authority disintegrated in front of an entire community and half the internet. I've spent 3 years of my life trying to protect property values and maintain standards, Karen declared, her voice rising. And if that means keeping certain elements from undermining what we've built here, then I make no apologies. The racist undertone was unmistakable, and the crowd began recording her outburst on their phones. Miguel, sitting up front, shook his head in disbelief, quietly live-streaming the moment to thousands of followers. That's when Detective Sarah Chun stepped forward and calmly addressed the room. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges, including fraud, embezzlement, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This is now an active criminal investigation. Karen's attorney restrained her from reacting, but the damage was already done. She had essentially confessed to financial misconduct while exposing the discriminatory intent behind her years of harassment. The community's response was immediate and powerful. One resident after another stood to share stories of how Karen had weaponized her authority, issuing violation notices for trivial reasons, causing financial stress through inflated HOA dues, and driving out families who simply couldn't take the hostility anymore. The Johnsons described being cited for suspicious gatherings when their extended family visited for the holidays. Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor across the street, stood and said quietly, "In 60 years, I've never seen anyone work so hard to destroy the very community they claim to protect." The ovation that followed our presentation wasn't for me. It was for the truth finally coming to light and justice being served. When the crowd quieted, I spoke from the heart. I didn't move to Willowbrook to be a lawyer again. I moved here to heal. But when someone steals from my community and bullies families for asking questions, they pick the wrong retired construction attorney. It was a mic drop moment Karen had never seen coming. 6 months later, justice found its symmetry. Karen Mitchell pled guilty to federal fraud charges. She agreed to pay full restitution, penalties, and legal fees in exchange for avoiding trial. The final amount, $847,000 in stolen funds. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and her husband quietly resigned from the city council once his role in the cover-up became clear. Sunset Construction fell under federal investigation and lost all its municipal contracts. Our story sparked a statewide HOA reform movement as other communities uncovered similar schemes. But our greatest victory wasn't the legal win. It was what we rebuilt from the ashes of Karen's abuse. We passed new HOA bylaws that ensured financial transparency, created resident oversight committees, and required independent audits. Every expense over $500 now needs board approval and public notice. Maria Santos was elected president. Jim Walsh stayed on as treasurer. And I accepted the role of compliance officer, a volunteer job where I could put my legal experience to work protecting our neighbors. With the recovered funds, we eliminated HOA dues for 3 years, used $300,000 to upgrade playgrounds, walking trails, and our community garden, which now donates fresh produce to the local food bank. The remaining $147,000 created the Sarah Martinez Memorial Scholarship for local students studying engineering. Miguel was its first recipient. Watching him accept that award, tears in his eyes, reminded me why this fight mattered. Sarah would have loved seeing her legacy help young people chase their dreams. The healing that followed caught me by surprise, turning my grief into purpose, channeling decades of courtroom strategy into helping neighbors instead of clients. Community meetings stopped feeling like court hearings and became spaces for shared ideas and progress. That summer, Miguel organized pool parties for the neighborhood kids, teaching them to swim, showing them that these spaces were for everyone. The sound of their laughter, echoing through the same pool Karen once tried to weaponize, became the true soundtrack of our victory. News of our journey spread far beyond Willowbrook. Property law journals featured our case as a model for grassroots action, and state legislators used our story to propose new HOA regulations. Calls began pouring in from other neighborhoods facing similar corruption, and helping them felt like the most meaningful use of my retirement. Today, real estate agents are required to inform buyers about HOA oversight rights, and cities are revising how community associations are audited. Most importantly, people across Texas are learning they have power when they organize, document the truth, and refuse to be intimidated. Karen had tried to isolate us through fear, but she ended up uniting us instead. We're now stronger, more connected, and more aware of how to protect each other. Detective Chun later told me, "Your case is now a training example for white-collar crime. Most HOA fraud goes unreported because people don't know their rights. Your documentation made this prosecution possible." Last month, we held our first annual community pool party, this time in Sarah's memory and to celebrate how far we'd come. Families gathered around the same pool that started it all, sharing food, laughter, and the deep joy of justice finally served. Miguel, now thriving in his engineering program, leaned over and said, "Uncle Dave, Aunt Sarah would be proud of what you built here." And he was right. We built something she would have cherished, a community rooted in fairness, transparency, and mutual respect. What's your HOA horror story? Share in the comments. You might be surprised how many people have experienced the same. And more importantly, you might inspire someone to stand up for their rights. Remember, you have more power than corrupt officials want you to believe. Know your rights, document everything, and never let anyone bully you out of the truth. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath stories where everyday people challenge corrupt systems and win. Next week, how a retired teacher exposed a city tax scam using nothing but public records and grit. Because sometimes the best revenge is refusing to stay silent. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us tell more powerful stories that matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop seeking the truth. When Karen banned my nephew from using the neighborhood pool, I didn't even know who she was. 6 months later, I knew her name, her bank account numbers, and every skeleton buried in her closet. That transformation, from quietly grieving neighbor to relentless investigator, happened because Karen Mitchell made one serious miscalculation. She decided to pick a fight with a retired construction lawyer, one who had spent 2 decades unraveling fraud and contract abuse, and who, after losing his wife, had nothing left to lose. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday when I opened my front door, still in my bathrobe, a hot mug of coffee in hand, only to find 2 confused police officers on my porch, flanked by one very self-satisfied woman in a pristine tennis outfit. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Some truths deserve to be heard. The morning air carried a strange blend of steam from my cup and her overpowering vanilla perfume, and in that moment, I should have realized this wasn't about pool rules anymore. So let me ask you, what would you do if your HOA's self-appointed queen tried to weaponize the police against you? Leave your worst HOA horror story in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from. I've got a feeling I'm not the only one living next to a power-hungry neighbor. I'm Dave Martinez, and 8 months ago, I really believed I was moving to paradise, Willowbrook Estates. 127 picture-perfect homes, all built in the last few years, centered around a $400,000 community pool that looked like something out of a luxury resort brochure. I paid extra for the corner lot with a perfect view of that pool, $750,000, when most homes here were going for $650,000. But I didn't mind. After watching my wife, Sarah, fight cancer for 3 years, I needed a fresh start. She passed last October. The house we'd shared for over 2 decades had become a shrine of memories I couldn't breathe in anymore. So I packed my things, retired from my career in construction law, and moved to Willowbrook to start a new chapter. My mornings became quiet rituals. Coffee, sunrise, the gentle rhythm of lapped swimmers cutting across the pool. It was peaceful, exactly what my grief counselor had told me to seek. And then I met her, Karen Mitchell. Mid-40s, real estate agent, HOA vice president. Lived in the model home right at the front of the development. Always dressed in designer workout gear, hair done, clipboard in hand like she was managing a billion-dollar portfolio instead of a few rows of suburban lawns. Married to City Councilman Brad Mitchell, which she made sure everyone knew within 5 minutes of meeting her. For a while, we had no issues. I followed the rules, kept my lawn neat, kept to myself. I was starting to feel human again. Then summer came. So did my nephew, Miguel. He's 16, my brother's kid from Phoenix. Smart, respectful, heading to engineering school next year. The kind of kid who still calls me Mr. Martinez, even though I keep telling him not to. Sarah and I never had children. First careers, then chemo, so Miguel's the closest I've ever had to a son. That summer, he stayed with me, working at the local hardware store and keeping his old uncle company. One sunny Tuesday, he invited 2 friends from work over to enjoy the pool. Good kids. Polite. They brought snacks, said please and thank you. They were in the water for maybe an hour and a half, laughing, tossing a ball around. Normal summer stuff. Then, like clockwork, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. She marched over through the thick scent of chlorine and that cloying vanilla perfume and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, I need to see guest passes for these young men. I blinked. Guest passes? I'd lived here nearly a year and had never even heard of such a thing. They're family, I told her calmly. This is Miguel, my nephew, and his friends from work. Her smile could have cut glass. Rules are rules, Mr. Martinez. Our bylaws clearly state that no more than 2 guests per household per week without prior registration. I offered to register them on the spot, but she cut me off. No exceptions. Then, consulting her clipboard like it was scripture, she said, pool privileges are suspended for Lot 47 pending compliance review. You could hear the creak of pool chairs as everyone around us suddenly became fascinated with their phones. Nobody wanted to be the next person on her radar. Miguel and his friends quietly gathered their towels, heads down, embarrassed. That night, Karen made it official, posting a suspension notice on the community board and announcing it again at the weekly HOA meeting with the theatrical flair of someone announcing a public shaming. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about rules. This was about dominance, control, and making an example out of the new guy. But what Karen didn't know was that the new guy used to make a living dismantling people like her. 3 days later, I received a certified letter. Karen had scheduled a compliance hearing, giving me just 48 hours notice. The hearing? Thursday night. Sarah's birthday. I'd planned to visit her grave, bring sunflowers, talk to her like I still do sometimes. Instead, I was told to defend myself against an HOA tribunal in what sounded like a scene from a bad TV drama. The letter listed several violations. Trash cans visible from the street, they weren't. Lawn height exceeding 3.5 inches, it measured 3.2. And my personal favorite, failure to maintain community harmony through guest management. That night, I did what I do best. I read every single line of the HOA bylaws, the charter, the closing documents, everything. 20 years in construction law teaches you this. If someone is using the rules as a weapon, there's always a loophole hiding somewhere. And I found it. Page 47 of the Community Charter. Reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. Her guest policy? In direct violation. Even better, her certified letter broke 3 procedural rules. Too little notice, no reference to specific bylaw numbers, and worst of all, scheduling during a family hardship. Thursday night, I walked into her home. Yes, she hosted the hearing in her own dining room, carrying a manila folder packed with documents, each page highlighted, color-coded, and tabbed. The smell of lavender air freshener was suffocating. I half wondered if she was trying to cover up something rotten underneath. Maybe corruption really does have a scent. As I sat down and looked around at the uncomfortable faces on the board, I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my nephew. I was holding a mirror up to the petty tyranny that people like Karen wrap in rules and clipboards. And I was just getting started.